This is the third day of the March 90 7-day retreat in Springwater. There's one thing I forgot to mention in the first talk, talking about talks, listening to talks. I forgot to mention to please find as comfortable a position as possible and bring in chairs. I noticed some people have brought in chairs, but recently there have been more chairs during talks, and maybe there aren't this time because I didn't say anything. So feel free to bring particularly the tubular chairs which fit right on the mat. You don't have to bother with carpet strips. To be as relaxed and without pain as possible during a talk. One may have notions or have heard that pain is good for one, but you can listen much better, much freer. You don't have to deal with pain, which takes a lot of energy and seems to gobble up attention when there's pain. Many, many things have come up in meetings. It's always hard to know where to start, but this thing comes up first. Two people saying something like this: putting myself in your shoes, getting the same questions all the time, and having to talk about the same thing over and over again. How does that feel? Sometimes people say, how do you do it? You see, this all depends in what state of a mind both of us are, or all of us here. Because when the question is not just asked casually, when there is also listening, inward and outward listening, then the words come. And they come freshly, because if we both start from not knowing, not looking for our pat answers or the explanations we may have remembered, or looking for explanations alone, just looking together, then an expression comes from the technical world. We are as a coupled system. The question eliciting words, and the words eliciting maybe more questions or comments, statements. And there is nothing stale about that, or cumbersome. If a question is asked casually and the person who asks this isn't even listening or not interested, then it's harder. But that happens very rarely in a retreat. And in talks, my only concern is that for you it isn't a bother to hear about the same thing over and over. I don't mind talking about the same thing. Because if one starts freshly, isn't the same thing. It's a new challenge to put into words what is looked at deeply, carefully, freshly. And this way that has been evolving here of questions and then a talk going further into these questions, maybe expanding, coming upon something new, and then maybe people asking more questions about it. This makes it a participatory process, which does not mean if one doesn't have a question, one is not participating, or that I sit in there in that room waiting for people to bring me questions. I have to say all of this because it has come up in the past, feeling sort of bad, not doing something for me if one doesn't bring a question. There are enough questions around, and I have saved some. I have a thick folder which I never look at, but I keep it just in case I run out of a question. With which I say, if someone feels like coming in there and just sitting, that's marvelous too. We may come upon something, a question or a statement or something may come up, or just the birds do their thing. Maybe open the window a little bit to hear it. So not to have this burden of thinking you have to bring something into that room. You don't even have to bring yourself into that room. Whatever that means. And there were more questions about questioning in this past 12 hours or 24 hours. What do we count? 24. Someone saying, in sitting, I usually don't have any questions. Is there something wrong with the way I'm doing this work? And someone else saying, go some more into what you mean by questioning. In what way is that different from analyzing? And someone else saying, why is there this tremendous emphasis in the work you do on questioning? That emphasis is not there in other places I've been. Why? You have it even in your name, a Center for Meditative Inquiry. Why this emphasis on questioning? Is it because, for myself personally, questioning started very early, living in a society in which practically nothing made sense? The persecutions, the war, the dying, killing, the fear, tremendous fear. And then having read and heard that there is a loving Father, God, floating above all of that, taking care of his children in many different ways. This didn't make any sense, so the question arose. I've talked about it frequently, this question of what is the meaning of this meaningless life. Was not an assigned question. On the contrary, the minister I talked to during a year of studying the catechism for being confirmed in the church didn't want questions. And I can understand why one wasn't questioning things in Germany. It could always lead to some dangerous exposure. My parents warned us not to question things, lest we be denounced for asking questions. And there are many people who come here or don't come here who have questions that bother them. And I don't think it's just that one has picked this up from reading Zen or Buddhist or Hindu or Eastern or whatever literature. The question, who am I, comes up quite naturally to many people. One person brought this question up in the first meeting. Am I just my techniques and practices that I use professionally? Is that all I am? Without them, what am I? So it's not, one must be careful not to begin to think of this place here in Springwater as the place where questioning is the way or the right way. People bring questions. Questions arise if one begins to look inside and out and not just stick with one's inherited or self-constructed explanations, which in the beginning, when we wonder about why we're in such misery or why things are the way they are, we look for causes outside of us. Because we are so habituated to thinking about ourselves as separate from the rest of this world or society or family, thinking of ourselves as victims or needing to tackle that, attack it as heroes. There's no precedence in our tradition for looking at the world and ourselves as one undivided whole. In which not only we are affected and conditioned by the traditions, but we also contribute to them ourselves, perpetuate them. The moment we learn to talk, and politics starts with the little grandchildren, with little children, very political. Who is on top? Who has the power? Competition. Who's better? The whole reward and punishment system, which one is first the victim of, and then one begins to practice on, for a small child, to practice it on the smaller child, provided the smaller child isn't bigger, that the younger child isn't bigger. So there is no such teaching. It's coming up here and there now with being more affected by Eastern philosophies. But here there, as far as I know, very little precedence in common understanding that this, we may be all one whole network, not separate, self-acting particles or units, which is also has been the prevalent view in science. Just read again how influenced we are by the prevailing scientific hypotheses, which were for a long time that the universe is separate particles subject to external forces from each other. Not the view of one unified whole movement. So that's where we started getting into this. Our first response is finding fault someplace else, seeing the cause for our problems externally. mother, father, society, teachers, or whatever. But as one observes more, and we do observe at times, or we may read someone else who has done a lot of observation, it may dawn that we're involved in what happens to us, our feelings and emotions and sufferings and sorrow and miseries and conflicts and fears and pains. We're intricately, integrally involved in that with the whole of society or world. And then doesn't the question arise, why? What am I doing? Why am I doing what I am doing? What am I doing? To find out how one gets into the same problem time and time again. We've so often dwelled on the problem of getting hurt, defensiveness, aggressiveness, or withdrawal at being hurt. Why do I get hurt? We do ask the question here, but people bring it up themselves. Or why do I suffer? Can suffering end? Can I be free? Many people ask this question. So, why is it emphasized here? Are we emphasizing it here? Yes, we're questioning all the time. Not in order to emphasize something over something else, to make ourselves a recognizable way. Never thought of it that way, and I don't think the person meant that. But it could be seen like that. This is the place where you question, and that is the place where you do. One notices that something does not make sense, or something is out of order, painful, repetitively happening. Doesn't one wonder about it and want to get to the cause of it? Or to get to the cause of it, doesn't one have to observe it in action as it happens? So one does not get lost in theory or conjecture, speculation, but find out firsthand, for which oneself, alone and in relationship with others, is such a perfect laboratory to study in. We don't have to commute to it, it's right here. And it's here all the time, either closed or open for inspection. When it's closed, we talked about that yesterday, can there be a gentle attention given to the closed upness, the closed downness, as we put it? Starting with that, not wishing I was open like other people seem to be, then there's no direct observation, but just wondering, what is this closedness? Or, as several people have mentioned to me who came upon something that seemed like a bottomless boredom, what is that? Because if we don't question, we reject or we cling. And by clinging or rejecting, we never understand what it is that we're clinging to, what it is that we're rejecting, and we don't understand the process of clinging or rejecting either. By not asking any questions, we take everything for granted, and for being so, because it has to be so, the brain will anytime supply rationalizations. It's human nature. You can't change it. Accept it. And then everything continues, perpetuates itself. endlessly. Does that make sense? That for one thing, we are so conditioned to take things for granted, to acclimate to conditions, adjust to them even if they're painful, live with it. That's the one side. And with that side goes no change. Patterns, the content of the patterns change, but the patterns themselves remain the same. And then one realizes that one suffers from the repetition of painful patterns in one's life, in one's relationship, or in the world. And then either a question comes up on its own, or one reads someone who is questioning, or finds a place where things are questioned. Not taken for granted, not plastered over with rationalizations, but unplastered, looking underneath the plaster. That's an exciting thing. As we've often mentioned that, and many people have confirmed that. There's a tremendous energy and joy in discovering. Even what is discovered is pain underneath the plaster, or discomfort or fear. If one doesn't hold back and say, oh, I don't want to get into that. I don't want to feel pain or fear. Plastering over and then continuing with a life of numbness or indifference that is also painful to one. But if one doesn't stop with the pain or the fear, but questions it, then what is it? What produces it? What are its consequences? How does it function? One can find out. It's the amazing thing. And there can be energy and joy in this discovery, as well as the pain that is discovered underneath the plaster. We've all plastered over pain. We've all had incredible pain since childhood, earliest of childhood. Wounds, scars, hurts plastered over. And when the plaster starts crumbling or dissolving, obviously there's something felt of what was capsuled off. And why not feel it in a new way? Without the name, the reaction, the memory, what it is and what it always was and how bad it is. But just approach it as something new. We said in one meeting, an old friend one has lived with all one's life but never met, never listened to, never asked the question of. And maybe this old friend is dying to say something about the pain, about the fear. Not about it. Speak. The pain speaks. It has its own voice or sound that can be listened to. Verbally, but also non-verbally. So coming back to another one of the questions, what is the essence of this questioning you're talking about? Is it like analyzing? I don't know what it is. We have to look, and some question may come up in my mind about something. Being afraid of something. The example we used, and it comes to mind right now in the meeting, was maybe one is afraid of losing one's job for whatever reason. And there's fear. And one wonders, why am I afraid of this? And the first response is to give answers. And why not? I'm afraid because then I may not have any more money, or I may not be able to pay the rent, take care of my children, wife, or what will my parents think of me if I lose a job, or other people. I hate to say I'm unemployed, I don't like that stigma. All kinds of answers will come up. And one listens to the answers. And then one listens, is the fear gone because the answers have come up? And one may find one is still afraid. Having listened to all of these answers, or the files have yielded them, have released them. The brain seems to have some kind of a searcher there in the files, and they open up and give some information. But the fear is still there. So one asks further, is that all I'm afraid of? Or is there something deeper? And wait for a moment. Maybe other answers come up. In this job, I am somebody, and I'm really deathly afraid of being nobody. And then why am I afraid of being nobody? See, one can proceed in this way verbally. Is that analytic? I don't even know what analytical question is anymore. A person with whom I discussed this said it is looking for a solution, which is very often why we start questioning. We want a solution to the problem that we're questioning. So we try to find a solution by this way that I've just unraveled or unfolded. And yet the fear may still be there, in spite of all of these quite satisfactory and accurate answers. And one may come to a point where the fear is still there, no more answers come, but the question is still there. What is this fear, or why am I afraid? And then, can one just leave that question alone? Not reject it as unanswerable or stupid or impossible, but let it be alive and do its thing, because it will surface again. Maybe at the moment when fear strikes very suddenly. Why am I afraid? And maybe something can be seen, because that question is there in the mind. And in this whole body-mind is not a separate mind. The interchange between brain and body, neurologically, chemically, electrically, is unfathomable and awesome. So, in asking what is the essence of the questioning here, that's maybe the essence, to ask but not to know, even though it's fine and all right to go through all of this giving answers and asking more questions. There's nothing allowed or forbidden here, nothing advocated or not. When we're doing this, we're just doing something together, but then it's up to each one to do this thing if one is moved to do it. So, we're saying there can be a questioning which opens, as it were, a door to not knowing. That not knowing does not annihilate the question. It's just, I don't know. And yet the wondering is alive. So you could ask, do I have to ask a question in order to live, at least at times, in the state of not knowing? Of course not. One doesn't have to ask a specific question, because just in listening to the sounds, the birds, or the wind. Right now there aren't any. Listening to no sound, or someone moving, clearing their throat. If we don't say this is a bird, or it is an oriole, or the mind likes to know what it is. But if one disregards what the mind has brought up, that something is, then can one just listen without the word, without the knowledge? Listening in this vast space of not knowing is the same as questioning. It could be interchangeable. What is everything if the words that come up so instantly, so immediately, the words, the knowledge, if that is seen as it comes up, but not taken as the real thing, just taken as for what it is, an instant response, verbal, intellectual reaction. But that still doesn't put me in direct touch with what is actually there. And the language is dualistic, is no me to be put in touch with that, because that's also questioned, what that me is, what that listener is. And I don't know. And if I don't talk about being a listener, then what am I? Cheat, cheat. Can one see that verbalizations about oneself, I am listening, or I can't listen, I can hear it, or I can't hear it, I'm just taking those as examples, that those verbalizations establish the sense of me, or let us say, strengthen it, or confirm it. It lies deeper than verbalizations, but verbalizations constantly reinforce it. And one can question those verbalizations. Does one have to do it? Or as it comes up automatically, I can do this, or I can't do it, I hear, or I don't hear. As this comes up automatically, can one see the automaticness of it and not take the words to express the truth, the reality. The reality, we don't know what it is. We know words, but what do they point at? What is this I that they point, the words point at, or seem to take for granted that it exists? Or what is a bird song without the word bird? Or without the word song? Does one know? Or does one have to listen? Freshly. The word has come up, but seeing the word does not prevent fresh listening. So, responding to the questioner who said, or to the person who said, I don't have questions most of the time when I sit. Is there something wrong in the work I do? One could immediately ask, why this idea about right and wrong? And can one question that? question it meaning see the impact of thinking that one is doing something wrong. The thought I'm doing something wrong has a definite impact on the body. It's a deflating impact, depressing maybe or discouraging. Whereas the thought I'm doing something right or well has an energizing impact. We talked at length about this, one of these 2 talks. But sitting and not knowing, just listening openly. And we use the word listening, but listening involves all senses functioning as a whole. It involves feeling and sensing, hearing, seeing, touching. Sitting openly in that way and not immediately, this is this and this is that, just the openness of attending. When that really takes place, there is no separation, is there, between me and the world? The sounds of the world are here, not separate, not at a distance. Not to be tackled or avoided or grasped. Thought does that. Thought comes up and says, oh, what a marvelous state. I want to keep that. I want to maintain it as long as possible because this is the solution to my problems, says thought. And in becoming very active, the me is established, the state is established as 2 things that one has to hold on to. And that no division is gone. Then a task has emerged, and a grasper has emerged, a wanter, a keeper, someone who fears of losing it. Do you see that? But when there is no sense of grasping or avoiding, wanting or maintaining, none of that, just the openness of listening, then is there a question? The question arises when the problems arise, doesn't it? When the I emerges, the thought emerges. I want that, I may lose that. Then it can immediately be questioned. What is going on? But when thought is quiet or unobtrusive, non-divisive, maybe there is no question to be asked. Because in that state there is no sorrow, there is no problem, because there is no division, no escape or clutching. Which doesn't mean that one can't ask questions out of that state with someone who's interested, to explore something that has concerned, and not just concerned, but haunted human beings maybe since time immemorial. Fear, sorrow, or whatever, if one can get together in this state and explore, which means what does it mean? To put into words what can be understood non-verbally, and yet in talking to each other who are interested, we have to use words, and exploring together we can make things clear verbally. Things can be clarified verbally and then talked about in a talk. so that maybe someone else who's also looking openly, freely, can understand something and talk to someone else. Not talk at someone else. It always has to be a witness. We have to both be interested in this. Bring the same interest and energy to it. Or openness. Openness meaning not stuck to whatever has come up. Remember we said yesterday this quote from this famous theoretical physicist, every statement has to be in danger of being false. And that's why it is very helpful to dialogue more than one person, because maybe somebody can point out where there's something false in the statement. There can be something false in the statement, and yet what is looked at is real. But to put it accurately is very difficult. To put it into accurate terms, and maybe all terms, all words are limited. And yet we can help each other in putting things as accurately as possible so that they are as easily accessible as possible to anyone else who's interested. There is nothing that is not worth exploring in full depth all the way. With which I come to another group of questions. Maybe we have to go on with it tomorrow some more. But it was an interesting group of questions. Several ones saying, all right, so I do find out some more about myself. Or I do come upon despair, sorrow, sadness. Or I do realize I have to give up wanting or give up this or that. But I still don't see the point of this work. Or I find something, but so what? I find out something about myself. So, what's the point of it? What's the point of coming here for 7 days? And then going back, my daily life. What use is insight about myself here in my daily life? But also, it's very complex, it's much more complex than I thought. The thing that echoed in a few meetings was, what's the point of sitting or doing this work? If that's a question that is really nagging in you, not just casually uttered as a reaction or protest, and I don't think it was the case, but it's a nagging question. It already has so much in it. One wants to do it, but one is also afraid. And then one says, well, what's the point? So what? Can that question be left alive, not killed off? Kept alive, and watching, listening, looking, attending here during the 7 days as well as at home or at work, in the light of that question. What's the point of knowing more about myself? What is this knowing? Is this knowing just accumulating more information about myself so I have more and more and more information. I could read books to do that. They convey a lot of information about human behavior. See, we're not talking about accumulating knowledge and information about oneself. That's a misunderstanding. It may be a byproduct. But finding out about oneself is a direct insight at this moment. The connection between a thought and the whole body ablaze with fear or desire. And seeing that connection, seeing something. So that may be the vital thing, is the seeing, the insight. Not so much what is seen, but that there is seeing, other than this, what we talked earlier, this taking for granted the way I am, and perpetuating pattern day after day and month after month and generation after generation. Seeing interrupts a pattern, and the pattern may not continue, at least at that moment. If it is deeply understood, maybe the next time it comes up, it is seen again and doesn't even have to take its habitual course. And it is easier to sit openly, vulnerably, attentively, quietly, in a place where other people are sharing in this activity, in this concern, than in our hectic life, which is so full of burdens, problems, distractions, entertainments, duties, goals, deadlines, overwork. Or if one isn't overworked, just constantly seeking distraction through entertainment, media. Then it's very difficult to have a direct insight for the seeing to start blooming. With which we're not saying it can only happen here, it can't happen anyplace else. Please don't misunderstand this. It's not tied to any place or any mode of standing, sitting, or lying down. And why is it important to have insight into myself? And by that I don't just mean understanding more about this aspect of my behavior and that aspect which has its function to understand more about it, or to maybe be done with some very painful or inhibiting symptoms by understanding them, having insight into them. But insight into this whole structure of self, the whole thing, not the parts of it. They're endless parts to it, because they're constantly being added or dug up. But insight into the whole thing, why is that important? What's the point of it? Maybe that's the clue to all the problems that beset human beings and have beset humankind since time immemorial. All the conflicts and warfare, inability to relate to each other lovingly, freely, openly. Because there's always me and you, which is ultimately irreconcilable, no matter how good the relationship may be, on the surface or maybe quite deeply. But as long as there's you and me, there's some irreconcilable problems. Because me creates desires and fears, which may be different from your desires and fears and needs. And the whole thing of two separate structures, two separately feeling individuals, is off, is false. It isn't so. One operates on something that is an illusion. Now, this statement is in danger of being false. You have to test this out for yourself. Is that really so, what she says? One doesn't immediately need to attack it. One can leave it sit there and look for oneself. Maybe one has already looked and seen it is so or it is not so. So by understanding thoroughly this whole movement structure of self, I understand what moves and structures every human being, even though there may be differences of content, color, and so forth. But this understanding this here is understanding it everywhere where human beings live or have lived. And with this understanding does come something that has been called compassion. Understanding, a passionate understanding with and for everyone. In everything. Seen out of wholeness rather than this thought-built structure of separation. This all may sound intellectual. Words are intellectual, and yet they point at something which is not. The sound of the birds are not words. The sound of movement in the room is not the word. So what is everything without the word? we will end here for today.